Welcome to Shift Happens. This is the weekly podcast that deconstructs the most recent episode of Bullshift and offers some action items that'll help you change your behavior to reach better financial outcomes. My name is John DeGuy. I'm the host of the podcast and the author of the book Bullshift. This is a different thing that we're trying now. After having done 65 or so episodes of Bullshift, the podcasts, the feedback I've gotten has been that sometimes the episodes are a little long at 30 minutes. And so, what we're looking at doing going forward is to divide the weekly podcast into two smaller bite sized chunks. The main podcast will remain 25 or fewer minutes long on Thursdays in its usual spot. But in addition, we will do a 5 to 7 minute separate podcast on Mondays, branded as Shift Happens, jumping off from where the previous podcast with the previous guest 4 days earlier left off, and adding to it by adding a bullshift spin to make sure that you understand exactly how some of the things I talked about with the subject matter expert might actually apply to the concepts in the book Bullshift. But then, perhaps even more importantly, tying things in with actual actionable items that you can take home and apply in your own personal life so that you can find a way to make better financial decisions and reach better financial outcomes. I want to begin by talking about something called Brandolini's Law. This is something that has been around for some time. The joke is that Brandolini and Italians aren't very good with the letter F. And so they have this, Brandolini has this rule that the amount of effort that's required to debunk bullshift is a matter of an order of magnitude greater than the amount of effort required to put the bullshift into the public domain in the first place. It's a fun joke, but it's also the sort of thing that I think listeners need to contemplate. And that is, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And my job, as I see it, is to help people make better decisions by thinking about things rationally, by recognizing their biases, thinking things through, and acting accordingly. So, as it pertains to the episode that we had on Thursday with my friend Dan Hallett from Highview, we talked a lot about risk and the risks that you might be taking as an investor that you might not realize, or that you might not even realize how risky your portfolio is right now. A lot of people, when I speak with them, have no real idea about the risk they're taking. And as a result, feel unqualified to make a determination about whether or not they should take steps to make things more conservative or not, or maybe even make things more aggressive if they're too conservative on the other side. They just have no real sense of how much risk they're taking. So I want to give you 6 metrics that regulators look at and that you can use, whether you're working alone or with an advisor, to look at your products and to think about them. If you're dealing with an advisor, you should take these 6 points and ask your advisor to explain them in detail for any products that you have your concerns about. So, know your product. An advisor has an obligation to know whatever products he or she is recommending to his clients, has 6 primary elements. The first are the features. So, what are the return expectations? Is a product using any leverage? What's the time horizon for the product? Is there any kind of a lockup period? So that's the first thing that you have to think about, are the primary features. The second are the risks. So what about liquidity? Is it the sort of thing that it might take a while to redeem? A lot of people, myself included, use products that sometimes take a month or two to redeem. It's not a huge liquidity risk, but if you need the money in a day or two, which is the way things are now, we're moving to T+1 in May of 2024, you can't get your money in one day with certain products that are a little less liquid. Not necessarily a risk, but it's a limitation is the way I would portray it. The third element is cost. As you probably know, one of the huge considerations in all investment products is, what does this thing cost? So you need to be aware of it and think about the implication on the long-term compounding. Fourth is structure. There's not a lot of guidance as to what regulators will provide with regard to structure, but are these synthetic products, or are they holding the basket of securities directly? Are they using options? That sort of thing. The fifth element is volatility, which, as we talked about with Dan, often is referred to as standard deviation, which is a sort of thing that almost no one has a handle on. But the question that you might want to ask yourself is, how good can things be if they go well? And more importantly, how bad can things be if they don't go well? So you want to get a sense of the parameters of the high highs and the low lows to get a sense of whether or not the likely outcomes are the sort of thing that you're comfortable with. And finally, what are the alternatives? If there's a product that you have, you should think about what other products could I be using as an alternative to have a similar mandate, but perhaps able to address some of the other five elements in a more expeditious or cost-effective or more liquid sort of way. So you always have to think about, even if you agree with the strategy, is this the best way to get exposure to that asset class or that strategy? So those are some things to think about. We'll see you next week.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager in Toronto and the author of the book Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. Bullshift is available online and in bookstores everywhere. The opinions expressed in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Bullshift, the podcast, is produced by TalkShoe, a division of IOTM.